Disney's marketing promotions are designed to make their parks feel like the only place where dreams come true. But in 2007, Disneyland got desperate. Amid shifts in management and less than favorable attendance, they turned to a silly idea. Perfect for somebody whose dream starts with grad nights and combines Space Mountain, a whole heap of stage lights, and the Red Hot Chili Peppers. In 1956, a group of teenagers from the John C. Fremont High School senior class decided to celebrate their graduation at Disneyland and the Disneyland Hotel. The park was less than a year old and the event was completely private, but this is the earliest instance of what would eventually become Disneyland's grad nights. Walt Disney was always on the lookout for ways to inspire more visitors to visit Disneyland. In September of 1958, the park hosted a back-to-school dance, in which several schools attended. Then, in 1959, Fullerton Union High School attended a private graduation dinner dance at the gourmet restaurant at the Disneyland Hotel for a donation of $4 per guest. The following year, in May of 1960, Disneyland hosted its first private party. For the first time ever, operating hours were adjusted for the general public, leaving a private group with the park all to themselves after a certain time. It was clear that Disneyland had strong potential as a private venue to entertain large parties, and perhaps that could extend to young adults celebrating specific academic achievements. In 1961, Disney legend Milt Albright orchestrated and sold the first official all-night annual Disneyland Grad Party Night, with the tagline, "The biggest, happiest grad night party ever." And big it was. The event held over 8,500 students from 33 schools at a cost of $4.64, which would be around $46 today, adjusted for inflation. And thus, a tradition was born. During the 2006 grad night period at Disneyland, the park began to experiment with the idea of putting in overlays on Space Mountain. For the nights the event was held, additional lights and a new soundtrack were added to the roller coaster. Dubbed Rocket Mountain, Disney Tomorrowland icon Cosmic Ray would introduce the attraction during the ride's lift hill, and the coaster portion of the ride featured Hoobastank's song, Let It Out. This experience wasn't available to the general public, but the overlay was a hit with those attending grad nights. With this and the popularity of Rock and Roller Coaster at Walt Disney World, the Disneyland Resort decided to go all in on bringing a similar experience to everyday park guests. In late 2006, Disney had just finished their largest celebration and promotion of all time, the happiest homecoming on Earth, where every Disney park around the globe got together to celebrate Disneyland's 50th birthday. Disney was petrified that after this celebration finished, no one would want to visit Disney parks again. They were so worried about this that they started to just give away free stuff with the Year of a Million Dreams promotion, starting the day after the happiest homecoming finished. Before the current era of Disney always being busy, Disneyland would traditionally see a slow period in the first quarter of the year. Disney felt this slow period wouldn't be helped enough by simply the Year of a Million Dreams, so it would announce a second promotion to run alongside it. Disneyland Resort announced that from January 2007 to April of 2007, they would be running a promotion called Rockin' Both Parks. For this event, Disney would take the most popular ride from each park and give them a rock star makeover. For a limited time, Space Mountain at Disneyland and California Screamin' at Disney's California Adventure received an overhaul with a brand new soundtrack by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Space Mountain would play an edited down version of their song Higher Ground, and California Screamin' would confusingly not feature any songs from the Californication album, but instead play a remixed version of Around the World. The soundtrack updates were partnered with brand new stage show-style lighting packages for each attraction. Rockin' California Screamin' was essentially the same as always. Apart from a different soundtrack, and a few lights along the coaster track that were only really visible at night. The biggest difference was felt at Space Mountain. From the moment you sat down to ride, you knew things were different. Rather than being welcomed by the sweeping, orchestral Michael Giacchino soundtrack, you were greeted with,
"Welcome aboard, Rocket Rockers. This is Uncle Joe Benson broad blasting live across the universe."
As you rounded up into the Star Tunnel, you were introduced to the idea of the space stage, where the Red Hot Chili Peppers were conducting a sound check for their intergalactic concert. Rounding the top of the lift hill, you would get a countdown.
"No matter which planet you're from, we're about to rock your world. And it's all gonna happen in 5, 4, 3, 2, rock and roll."
You would traverse the well-known and loved Space Mountain layout, which was now lined with multicolored stage lights, flashing in time with the trains, making for a much brighter version of Space Mountain. Partnered together, this made it feel like you were living through a concert experience, very similar to how Rock and Roller Coaster used to feel in Paris. This promotion was also supported by absolutely iconic park maps that had speakers in the shape of Mickey ears. Now, you may think this absolutely screams an Eisner-era promotion, but it actually came a couple of years after he left the company. Which of course, leaves us with the overarching question, who was this for? Who out there got convinced to finally visit Disneyland because the Red Hot Chili Peppers music was playing on Space Mountain? The promotion brought nothing else new. They just switched over the MP3s, chucked in some lighting rigs, and called it a day. Now this works for a private event such as Grad Night, where attendees can get a feeling of exclusivity in experiencing something unique. But the same thing is difficult to achieve with the everyday guest. Our host Dom experienced this himself, and said that despite the rock music and additional lights being a neat experience, the change in soundtrack dampened the anticipation and excitement of the ride. The grand orchestration by Michael Giacchino in the lift hills was replaced by cheering crowds, thin sound effects, and a voiceover that did little to hype guests for the upcoming roller coaster. Likewise, he barely remembers the rockin' overlay for California Screamin' at all. Attendance did rise by around 150,000 guests from 2006 to 2007, but it's hard to say that this was thanks to rockin' both parks, as during the same time frame, Disney's California Adventures attendance dropped by almost 300,000. The promotion was clearly designed to try and bring something new to the resort in the traditionally quiet period at the start of the year. Rockin' Space Mountain and Rockin' California Screamin' both never returned, but they did lay the groundwork for future overlays of Space Mountain, such as Ghost Galaxy and Hyperspace Mountain. We get this feeling that for Disney, Space Mountain has never really been enough, despite being one of the most iconic roller coasters in the world. The ride has received so many changes, tweaks, and overlays that it's difficult to keep track of. Or perhaps it's just the perfect canvas, providing a cheap opportunity for the company to bring change to the park with little expense. But Space Mountain, with the addition of Michael Giacchino's soundtrack, excels at what Disney does best: storytelling. It's an adventure through space, where you're riding aboard a rocket ship. The cue, music, atmosphere, and pacing all combine to be greater than the sum of their parts, thanks, in part, to little expectation. The name Space Mountain elicits little from the imagination, whereas guests begin to expect much more when you start bringing over other additions to the experience, such as Star Wars and rock concerts. But what are your thoughts? Would you like to see more done with Space Mountain, or should Disney just keep it as is? Let us know in the comments down below. From the home of all things theme parks, I'm Luke for ReviewTyme. Thanks for watching, liking, and subscribing.